My phone rings, and I answer it, and the person on the other side said, is this a Latino-owned business? And before I could answer, he said, are you the owner? Are you Latina? And I smiled to myself, and I said, yes, I am. And it was quiet for a second, then we both started laughing. And he said, well, good, because I need to bring in 5,000 Latinos into my clinical trial, and I hope you can help. And that was the beginning of an amazing and successful journey. You see, when we want to reach out to different cultures, we often think that we need to connect with somebody of the same culture. And actually, that's very, very good thinking, and it's a great way to start. But what's really important is having the right, authentic cultural connection, and that's what starts to really build participation and engagement and trust. The person that had called me was a renowned neurologist at UCSF, and he had a big problem. He looked at his career and he looked at his registry of over 70,000, which was very successful, but there was no diversity. It was not representative of this country. And so he took it on. It was his mission to make sure that he was going to now start to enroll people and have a better, diverse population, more representative of this country. What I'm going to talk about today is a little bit more of the landscape that we have, where we're at now, and also how to create a better campaign where you can really connect and reach multicultural populations. And I'm going to also talk about 6 pillars that I kind of identified that I think are really mission critical for anybody who, how many, by the way, show of hands, are participating or involved in clinical trials? Couple? Okay, great. Just want to know who I'm talking to. All right, so let's start with the big problem in the country right now. This is our country. We're multi-generation, multicultural. We have just a very diverse, wonderful country. And this is what clinical trials look like. They're predominantly educated white male. This is the percentage as of 2022. I actually had 2010 on there, and it was 67%, so it's gone down about 10%. And that is representative of this country right now. It's probably changed a little bit more. And the Latino population, Hispanic Latino, is actually the largest racial minority group in this country. The interesting thing is that there are other areas like DC that's actually has a bigger Black American culture population there. If you go to California, it's actually, I think the Latin is now starting to be greater than the non-Hispanic white. So we have pockets like this all over our country, and then again, you look at clinical trials and you look at the databases, and they're just not representative of that. Why does that matter? Well, diseases affect people differently. We know this now. We've learned this, we've known it. So if you have diseases that are, and medications that are affecting people differently, why don't we have them in our trials so we can understand? The second point is everyone should have good health care. And I think most of us believe this. I know all the doctors I work with believe this. So if we should have health care, why don't we have clinical trials available to this population as well? And we've done a lot of focus groups, and we've talked to different people, and it's sad, really. We're better than this, but you talk to different communities, and they're like, I don't even know that there's clinical trials available. And you hear very sad stories about people that died from cancer that could have been in a trial, they just didn't know about it. So part of that is the communication. The other reason why we want to have better representation is that a lot of our populations are affected by diseases differently. So we look here at the Hispanic Latin community is affected 1.5 times more by Alzheimer's or has a likelihood, and then our Black Americans 2 times more. And this goes on in all different types of diseases. So when you start to look at that, you go, wow, we really do need to do a better job of reaching out so we can get them into our trials and start to understand and make a difference. But as I mentioned before, this doctor who really wanted to change what he was doing in his clinical trials, the diversity problem is not really an oversight. It's actually more of a systemic problem that's going on in this country, and it's been going on, and we're just sort of suffering from it because, unfortunately, we had some very bad studies, some studies that just went wrong. And the challenge is right now is building that trust back up, because even though that's not happening now and we have all kinds of protocols and safeties, you'll talk to people today who still remember what happened, and it didn't even happen to them. It happened to the grandparent or the parent. And so when we are constantly bringing these stories into today, it starts to create this huge gap of distrust. So it's something that we really need to address, and we're going to talk about how to do that. I also mentioned that actually the FDA, so with our authorities, the FDA has now regulated that all participation of clinical trials going forward must have at least 20% of underrepresented population. There are a lot of different regulations going on right now. The FDA is really trying to move in that direction with current studies, so I don't think that it's affecting the current studies as much. But all new studies, if you want to get a drug past a phase, you must have at least 20% population. And what I'm finding now is that everyone's looking at this going, how do I do it now? This is regulated, what do I do? We've taken it upon ourselves to really get involved in this. It's become my mission, just like it was the doctor's mission. So now it's my mission as an agency to help as many clinical trials at pharma and at government level. So the story behind how this came to be, I've been in marketing for a long time. And we have a health division and we have a Latino Hispanic marketing division. But this all came together when that doctor called me. And as we got involved and started doing this work, it became a passion of my whole company. It's so great when you can do marketing work and actually make a difference. And so in this particular story starts with this challenge of getting Latinos into this trial. This was not an easy feat. We're talking about 55 plus. That's probably like the one good thing that came out of COVID, because it was around the time of COVID, is that more people had to go online and our older population had to start to get comfortable with that. So that was helpful. But remember, we're talking about Latino population. They're not necessarily sitting on the phones and looking at social media or doing that. And on top of that, in this particular situation, most of them that we're reaching don't speak English. So we've got a lot of challenges, and that's not counting the fact that to be in this registry for Alzheimer's study, they had to go through a fairly kind of rigorous 2-hour setup. So we had a lot of things going against us. And when we looked at how we were going to do this, we decided to stop and think about, okay, who are we talking to? Who is our audience? And we've been doing a lot of that over the last 2 days, talking about hitting the right audience, knowing who you're speaking with, knowing how to connect. And I was talking earlier about cultural values and really understanding how to connect with people. So we said, well, who are we talking to now? And this was a California study. So we had to look at where are our Latinos coming from, predominantly Mexico and some Central America. That makes a difference because every Latin Hispanic country has some different values and different ways of speaking, different ways of saying words. So when you start thinking about messaging, you have to think about all these things. And as we looked at that, we also noticed, well, 55 plus is not going to be an easy group. But I know about the Latin community, they're always very family oriented. And if you're in this country and you're speaking only Spanish, then probably you have siblings who speak English and are helping you get along. There's also communities. You'll find a lot of a community is predominantly like Spanish neighborhoods, just like you see in New York. You've got your Italian neighborhood, you've got your Chinese. We all love and appreciate those cultures, but if you actually really look at that, they're predominantly speaking their native language and not any English at all. So taking all of these things into account, we decided to really break down our groups, and we broke them down into generations. So we had our older generation, mostly Spanish speaking. We had our adult children, which were bilingual, and then we also had our younger. Now, younger kids are consuming most everything in English and they pay attention, but they are the ones that go to the parent or the grandparents and say, you need to do this. They're also the ones at home that are helping them on the computer. So as we recognize that, we decided to launch actually 3 different campaigns. So this is one campaign, but 3 different channels and 3 different looks, 3 different feels, predominantly all the same messaging. So you have that one umbrella messaging, and we wanted to say, what's going to cut across all of these different generations? And when we looked at the family values, that resonated all the way through. We said, let's lean into that. Let's lean into family, and let's lean into also memories and the storytelling that we do. Our grandparents tell us these amazing stories, and it just carries on from generation to generation. How do we protect that? How do we talk about it? When you look at a lot of the clinical trials that are done today, it's science talk. They want to talk about inclusion and exclusion, and they want to talk about the requirements, and it just sort of just washes over most people. They don't understand, and it's a little scary when you start hearing all that medical jargon and inclusion and exclusion, and you're like, oh my gosh, you know, and there's already a distrust in the market. What we decided to do is say, let's have a different door. Let's talk about really wonderful things that are more aspirational. Let's get them just hearing us first. And when they came into this door that felt appropriate to them, we could start to talk about the study. We could start to explain why studies are important. The third, these are style skates, by the way, that led into all of our campaigns, landing pages and creative. The last one is in English, but it was actually all Spanish. But again, we're sharing this with a lot of the medical community, which doesn't speak Spanish. So we wanted them to be able to read it, but all of that was translated into Spanish. This is just a quick snapshot of the main landing page, and then, of course, the all Spanish landing page. And you can see that there's a lot of the same information, but we were very careful also to make sure the translation was correct and right. The Facebook and social media is something I think that is essential. And it's also the scariest part for corporations, for organizations to embrace. And one of the things that we knew that we had to do was get over this hump, build a bridge for trust. And how do you do that? You have to take the ugly, you have to take the mistrust and hear what people are saying and not react to it. So our strategy here was to hear what people had to say, not react to it, not respond. Any information we put on social media was good educational, health, tips, science-backed information. But in this scenario, what we decided to do was let these comments stay. And what we found was 10, 20, 50 sometimes conversations going on in social media with the peers and community. And people saying, no, 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 we're not guinea pigs. No, we're not lab rats. I was actually in a study, it was wonderful. Oh, I put my mother in that. These are amazing comments that you're seeing and conversations happening on the platform that we created. That is what started to build trust. We went into having thousands of people following us. There's no way that we could have gotten 5,000 people enrolled, actually 20,000 enrollments, had we not created these bridges of trust and continued to talk about more aspirational things. Why would you be in a clinical trial at all? Because Alzheimer's is a real problem and we need to start talking about it. And as we had these conversations, people just naturally gravitated to the clinical trial. These are the results of this particular study. It was very, very successful. This doctor was very happy and started recommending us, and that was 5 years ago. It's become an amazing mission for us. We've been doing many, many trials, and it's just great to see the results that we're getting. This is just some quick visuals on just how you can bring a study and make it more aspirational. This one was Count Me In. It happened to be after a lot of things that were happening in this country where there was a lot of controversy, and we wanted to lean into that a little bit. The messaging has changed now. What we do today is very different. In fact, it's really interesting because as much as we want to be connecting culturally, people are actually really tired of hearing the word DEI or inclusion or any of the words that, like diversity. Now multicultural is becoming the more, so you're having to constantly keep a pulse of what people are feeling comfortable with, how they want to label themselves, how they want to talk about themselves, and how they want to see themselves. But one thing that does cut across everything is that if you talk to people in their language, communicate understanding their values, you really do build some amazing trust. And the trust is what you need before you can start to get people into a study. Men's brain health, another really great study. It was for men in sports. And actually, I think one of the doctors did play in football. So this is sort of a really passion story for him. And they do this, just a small conference that they do. They're building a registry, but they do it around Super Bowl every year. So it's just, doctors and community coming together, but they're wanting to build a registry of Black men in this country to start to become aware of what's going on with their brain. And so again, just having more aspirational lifestyle type messaging and imagery really connects. And if you can open that door and get them to come in, then you can start talking about clinical trials. Everything we do is always IRB approved, so there's nothing, kind of crazy that we're doing. It's just we are looking at it from a different lens, and it really is resonating. So now let's talk about the marketing and the 6 pillars so that you can start building your own successful multicultural marketing. I wanted to start out with this because when you talk about connecting digitally, it's hard sometimes to put your hands around it. It's not very tangible. But when you think about how we all greet each other, that's very tangible. So you look at sometimes we bow, sometimes we high five, sometimes we hug. Why do we do that? And how do we know to do that? Well, we know to do that because we either grew up and we were told to do that, or we observe each other. A lot of times you can be sitting across from the table. We all do business meetings, and if somebody's sitting with their arms folded, you may want to sit with your arms folded. You want to mirror people so that they feel comfortable. If somebody's sitting with, their elbow and hand like this in a meeting, then you may want to do the same thing. You start to build connection, because if you can build connection, then people are open to communicating with you. So this is the more tangible way of sort of understanding marketing. So let's look at how we do that digitally. Part of it was some of the imagery I showed you. The imagery is really important. It's worth 1,000 words. So if you have great imagery, people are going to stop and look. What platform are you reaching people on? What are you using, Google where they're searching? Are you using social media where they're hanging out? What kind of messaging are you looking at? Are you talking about incentives? So when we look at incentives, we don't always think about that, but medical care is a big deal, and they do get medical care in a lot of clinical trials. It's important to note that. And then you look at keeping them engaged. I can't tell you how I always stress this. It's so hard to get people in the door. Once they're there, you've got their email, you've got some contact information. Put them on a database, even if they don't qualify, because they may qualify for something. Create a registry. It makes it a lot easier. I think it was great hearing the conversation about, sales and marketing alignment. It's similar. Once you have people there, the results future are much better for you. So once you have 1,000 patients, keep them. So you can talk to them about it later. This pillar 2 to me is the most important pillar. And I think it was Jim yesterday that was talking about the marketing and then the gap and the goal and what's happening in the middle. Well, this is what's happening in the middle. There's all of this wonderful information coming through. Sometimes our clinical people don't even realize this is happening, but this has to happen in order to get people enrolled. They have to sign up to WID4, they have to pre-qualify, they have to get a consent. You're getting all this rich data, all these data points. That information has got to go back to your marketing, because we talked about yesterday effectiveness and efficiencies. So in order to be effective, you have to have the data. Once you have the data and you see what's happening, then you become efficient. So this is helping you in that time frame. Then we go into the fact that we're in every changing digital world. We now are mostly cookieless. Everywhere you look, if you're downloading, it says, do you want cookies? Will you allow cookies? Well, without cookies, marketers can't track you. It becomes really hard to understand how to find our communities and our groups. Well, now there's third-party cookies that are allowed, and that's just tracking behavior and activity. Simon said, I like to surf. So if I'm out looking at, wetsuits or things like that, Google knows, and Amazon knows, and the world knows, all the behavioral things. So it's not tracking me personally, but it is tracking behavior. And this is important to understand that so that you can help find your populations, your communities. We also have ever-changing guidelines and privacies. Privacy is really important to demonstrate because that helps build trust. People want to know that you're following all of the right qualifications and GDRP and making sure that you're not violating anything, and you communicate that and you let them know, because you do want to constantly communicate with people digitally, so you have to let them know that it's safe. Also, on the fifth pillar, the optimizing without pixels has been one of the greatest challenges. So to honor privacy, then we want to stop the following of our potential patients up to a certain point. We used to be able to follow them all the way to a form fill and all the way to the end behavior. That's how we could optimize. You can't do that anymore, but there are ways to figure out how to do that. You can keep it encapsulated in Facebook, and if you do that, you can get all this wonderful data that you use to optimize an account. And optimization is what helps you get those efficiencies. So for the final pillar, I left it to choose the best marketing partner. I think a lot of the clinical trial business, they always go outside. They have an inside marketing team, but then you go outside to get certain things. So make sure that you've got a partner that's understanding all of this, understanding the cultural differences. They don't have to be of that culture. In fact, in some of our trials, we look at bringing advisory groups together or community groups, and that really helps us understand all the other cultural differences. So just being culturally aware, understanding different value systems, that's going to help a lot. And there is your success formula for multicultural campaigns.
Thank you, Roxanne. That was wonderful. And we're pretty much right on time, but is there any quick questions or comments for Roxanne just regarding her talk and the concept? Yes, Michelle.
Hi, Roxanne. Thank you very much. It was wonderful. I liked, interesting in terms of your conversation about the Latino the communities in the U.S. In my experience when I worked at Kraft, we had different messaging in California for the Mexicans, in Florida for the Cubans, and the Puerto Ricans up in the New York and upper U.S. So I love that. Interesting, obviously moving into biotech and pharma, this has been a major challenge for us.
Yes.
Having worked in Alzheimer's, ALS, and now in lupus, and I'm very happy to see you're doing this work. Question for you is, I've had a lot of success with the online or the offline component of recruitment. So, for example, Chinese communities, hepatitis C, going to church groups, for example. Could you talk a little bit about how that the offline world integrates into a lot of your online campaigns?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is critical, actually. So part of reaching out to our different cultures is also what I call a grassroots approach. And it's got to run simultaneously with this. In this one study we're working on right now is 67 sites. So every site is different, but every site is in a community. And so that's where we look to embrace the community. It's a wonderful outreach when you follow up with the church or an organization and you invite them and ask them if they would like to help support you. And they almost always say yes. What can I do? Do you have any literature? Do you have any, tchotchkes or things I can give out? And we've been very successful in New York with that campaign, where we did with the Black community in Harlem, and we went to churches and we basically filled the study at the church level because they were so excited to pass that information out. And all of the studies that we do have an advisory board, and then that sort of branches out. So thanks for bringing that up, because it's actually really important to involve it. It's different, right? You have to have, like I said, have the right marketing partner that understands that, because that's a component that needs to be activated.
Great question and answer there. Any additional comments or questions for Roxanne before our break? No? Okay, let's put our hands together again for Roxanne for a wonderful...
Thank you.